Sailors of Reddit, what's the weirdest / creepiest thing you've seen at sea? During WW2 my dad, a wireless operator on a minesweeper, passed by a German pilot, waving frantically from his still floating aircraft in the North Atlantic. They were under strict orders not to stop, because of the danger of subs. So they left the poor guy to certain death. My dad died a couple of years ago, but this incident haunted him throughout his life. He wept about it even in his last few hours. Edited for my stupid grandma. My granddad was on county class cruisers escorting convoys to Russia. They saw a Russian flying boat with engine difficulty ditch near their convoy, so they closed to assist, but the flight crew hadn't secured their depth charges properly and one was knocked loose and detonated under the plane. He said it was the weirdest thing. The crew suddenly stopped swimming, and when they fished them out there wasn't a mark on them, but they'd been killed stone dead by the pressure. I came across a man who'd hung himself on his boat 5 or 6 miles offshore about 4 or 5 years ago. The eerie and truly creepy part was realizing what it was. We just saw a boat out in the middle of oceans nowhere without anything other than blue horizon in sight at the break of dawn, and there was fairly thick fog, as it had rained the night before. Realizing that the figure hanging from the boom was a man was one of the most haunting things I'll ever see. My uncle was lost at sea while sailing. He went missing near the Marquesas and there was a big search and lots of people involved, and emails going to all family with updates. They found his boat sunk, missing the raft. My cousin told me that he thinks his dad committed suicide and sunk his boat beforehand on purpose. He would have enjoyed this one last mystery. So the point of my story is that sometimes I think people like to get as far from people as possible before they off themselves. This huge turtle as big as a Volkswagen Beetle. It went right under our boat. She was crazy. I have family who sailed around the world. One day in the North Atlantic, their sailboat was going over some gigantic swells. They didn't have brakes at the top, so it was safe, but the boat was rising and falling way beyond the neutral. At the bottom of a trough my uncle looked up to see the sun behind a wave and the silhouette of a whale inside, above him. We were once ported out of Bahrain, and we woke up to this god-awful smell. We tossed on our coveralls and headed for the weather deck to find a cargo ship on the next dock, stacked 5 stories high with cages of live lambs. You still wake up sometimes, don't you? You wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs. Losing your ship's service generator in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, late at night. Most of the electrical service to the ship is lost until the emergency diesel generator hopefully starts up. When you're used to all the vibrations and sounds in your living spaces, silence is deafening. FCK man, I get scared at the silence when my Xbox turns off at night. I can't imagine what your situation is like. We are so used to our safe lives, where it's unlikely you will face a really dire situation, let alone one that could actually kill you. Out at sea, you're out there in nature, on a little frail piece of humanity that you brought. That is the only thing keeping you alive, and that doesn't belong there. A thin layer of plastic or wood or steel, if you're on a big ship, is the only thing between you and infinite amounts of water. There is nothing as far as you can see. You're not in the city with a supermarket within walking distance. You only have the drinking water, food, and fuel you brought. There is a reason why space travel borrows a lot of its terms and concepts from seafaring. It takes disturbingly little to go from all is great to all is ducked. It was a foggy night off the shore of Long Island, and I was on a 75-foot schooner. The fog was so thick that you couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of you. The captain tells me there is no point to continue my watch at the bow of the ship and I start talking at the stern. About that time there is thunk on the side of the ship. We both turn to see a figure dressed in black flowing robes walking towards us on the outside of the ship. The robes were scratching down the outside of the ship. It keeps coming closer and is high enough in the air that the top was about even with our heads. It turns out that it was just a black flag to mark a lobster pot, but for those first few seconds it was terrifying. Lol. Stupid creepy lobster pots. Once thought I saw a small landmass on the horizon. Upon closer inspection it turned out to be a dead whale, belly up with seagulls standing on it pecking away at its flesh. Last year I saw a seagull floating by, riding a dead seal pup. I swear he looks smug. Not me, but my father back in his commercial fishing days noticed that there was a t-shirt in the middle of his net after one tow. After a little investigation he found that it was not a shirt, but a human torso wearing a shirt. He said he was terrified that he would open the net and a head would roll out onto his feet, but it didn't happen. His captain radioed ahead, and they brought the torso back to the docks, where they were met by the police and a coroner. They were eventually able to identify the body, based on the clothing, as a victim of a plane crash that had occurred fairly recently. My dad said he offered a free lobster to the coroner, who graciously accepted it, until he found out that it had been found in the net with the body. After that he got angry, and told him to throw it back. That understandable. That lobster probably had been eating the torso. Fishing out near the Great Barrier Reef, and my brother who gets seasick decides to go for a swim to settle his stomach, and less than a minute after getting back into the boat a 17-foot great white went under the boat. I've been told that unassisted swimmers don't resemble their prey. On the other hand, I've also been told that Santa Claus is real. While that's true, sharks tend to bite stuff they're curious about. Tiger sharks, for example, you want to stay well clear of because they'll take a bite out of anything. A bull shark will do the same thing, and you don't even have to be in salt water. Not a sailor, but I was on a fishing charter boat on Lake Erie. It was around 5 AM in the morning, and the water was scary calm and glass-like, and it was so foggy you could not see more than 30 feet of that. We all started hearing this plopping sound, like somebody was slapping the water with open hands. It kept getting louder and closer. At this point we had all slowly moved to the other side of the boat, not knowing WTF it was. Even the boat captain was standing there in total silence as we all just stood there and listened to this plopping sound getting closer and closer, and to the shock of us all, a deer swam by the boat. Yes, a deer. It looked to be a very large buck with at least 10 points on his rack. We were more than 10 miles offshore, so it made no sense at all. Can you say freaky? The sea is a vast and seemingly empty place. Many fail to grasp this when asking questions like, how can you just lose an airplane in the ocean? I found myself on my ship, somewhere in the vast expanses of the South Pacific Ocean. We had been cautiously avoiding big storms, which I knew to be all around us out further than the eye can see. Although our local ocean area was calm and peaceful, I was on watch when I noticed something out there in the distance, bobbing along, that I had never seen before, especially this far from land. As I got closer, I identified what was clearly a makeshift raft made from lashed together bamboo, with a snapped mast and an empty cooler moored to the deck. Upon this raft was not a soul. The chances of coming across a raft to begin with are small enough in that part of the ocean. Thinking about the persons who once sailed that raft, why they sailed, and how they met their fate, that was what creeped me out. Here's hoping they were rescued by another ship and left the raft for scuttle. But I have a strong feeling that our mysterious captain didn't make it. Damn. I really hope that they were rescued. That's so heartbreaking and terrifying. Could you imagine? If they died on that raft, I at least hope they drowned, as opposed to dying of dehydration or something. The stars. When you're 3 days from the nearest land, and it's a clear night. More stars than you could ever imagined. And enough shooting stars to make you run out of wishes. It was also pretty cool being stuck in the Panama Canal with a Los Angeles class submarine when they had to shut down the locks. Before we knew what was going on, there were helicopters everywhere dropping off Marines to set up around the lock. California to Los Angeles. That right there was my favorite part of being in the Navy. Goddamn, I miss the sky. Toilets on boats are usually plumbed with seawater because it makes no sense to shit in your limited drinking water. One night I was taking the watch on a long haul sail up the US East Coast. We were rounding the FL Keys about to point towards Maine. I had to use the head, so I went below and pumped some water into the bowl. It was glowing in the dark. Freaked me out so much. Turns out there is photoluminescent phytoplankton in the water, which will glow if pumped into a dark toilet bowl. No longer scary, actually pretty neat. Well, I'm no sailor, but I'm in the military. On 9/11/2013 I was on a ship in the Red Sea. We were having a ceremony in remembrance of 9/11 when up floats a dead body right next to the ship. We were all locked down pretty quickly so that they could send out a couple small boats to retrieve it. Never did hear anything more about it. Pretty damn weird, if you ask me though. Heard this from a mate. Australian naval supply ship in the Great Southern Ocean, next to another naval ship. Swell was so great, the top of one ship's mast was deck level to the supply ship. Another, told by a different mate, they were fishing off the shelf off NSW. Boat big enough to hold 6 blokes. A shark longer than their boat swam past. They packed up and went home. Some things are too big and have too many teeth to fish near. Yikes. Makes me wonder, how large can carnivorous sharks truly grow? There must be at least a few huge sharks out there larger than anyone has ever seen. I heard this story secondhand from an ex-boyfriend. Happened to this dude deep sea diving in the Mediterranean off Italy. The guy told him the story. Dude was coming up from the dive with his friend. They're still 75 feet deep, so it's so dark you can only see a few feet and they're facing each other using hand signals waiting to acclimate to the depth before going up some more. All of a sudden this dude's friend's face goes white as a sheet and looks terrified. He turns to see a huge great white shark swim up behind him passing a foot from where they're swimming. Supposedly a 25-foot shark. Apparently if they are old enough, they get pretty big. Not the sea, but on Lake Michigan we saw a huge float of blow-up dolls all tied together just floating. There was probably about 15 of them just tied together floating there. Was ducking strange to say the least.